Hi, Jenni here, and it's time for Jenskosmos Book Awards 2025! Oh my god, I've been doing these videos from 2021, the start of my channel, and basically the point is to award different books I've read throughout the year. You know, there's like classic best fiction award, best non-fiction, best memoir, the most wholesome read. And I will only mention one book per category. So ultimately, one book will be the best book overall, but they will not be awarded in other categories. The first award is, of course, congratulations, Jenni read you this year. Woo! And that goes to 76 books and counting this year. I cannot even fathom that I've read that many books. See, when you're unemployed, you have time to read. And I've had a really good reading year. I tried to find a book for the worst book award, but I genuinely couldn't find any, because the ones that were a bit of a letdown, it was because I wasn't the demographic for the book. Like, for example, maybe some YA books I didn't feel like resonated with me, but that's because I'm not the age demographic for those books. So ultimately, I've had an amazing reading year. And it's still continuing, not as intensely as so far this year, but it's still continuing. Alright, moving on to the most wholesome read. And this goes to a book that gave me a cozy feeling, that was clever, that was fun, entertaining, but also had a deeper message underneath. The most wholesome read of the year is Lauren Harper Falls Apart by Shauna Robinson. Woo! Okay, so last year, Shauna Robinson was my favorite new author, and I've decided for myself that whenever Shauna releases something new, I will be buying it. This book was released this autumn and I read it as an ebook, and it tells the story of Lauren Harper, who is working a corporate job and has her life planned out. She wants to retire by certain age so that she can start living her life, but until then she will live in a bad apartment at a job that she doesn't really love, but it's all towards that future goal. The main character is deaf in one ear. And due to a co-worker or a supervisor not realizing this, and Lauren not wanting to ask, no, can you repeat over and over again, Lauren gets demoted. The major corporation that she works for is called Riser, and it came off to me as like a parody of Nestle. So she is demoted to Riser Cares, which is like the charity wing of Riser, and it's based in her hometown of Grinstead, which is a fictional town. But the other people working at Riser Care's offices are similarly demoted workers at Riser who do not do anything at all, basically. But Lauren Harper is determined to rejuvenate the Riser Care office, and they start to plan on autumn festival that happened when Lauren was a child, but they stopped doing it, so they are working on to bringing that back. In her hometown, there is also her former best friend that she had a really bad falling out in her 20s. Riser had caused damage in the Grinstead community, which has then made it really hard to be a business and a person living there. But Lauren is very determined to help the locals. What I really loved about this book was the emphasis on community, emphasis on how you do need people around you. It had this message of anti-major corporations wrapped up in this beautiful autumnal atmosphere. I absolutely loved it. I loved the writing. It's very cozy, straightforward, very typical for the genre. The cast of characters in the book are so lovely, and all of them are unique and have full stories. They're not just some side characters. And overall, I really love this book so much. And the next category is best memoir / biography / autobiography. And I read plenty of excellent memoirs this year, but I do have to say the best one was Marsha, The Joy and Defiance of Marsha P. Johnson, written by Tourmaline. Marsha P. Johnson was a trans rights activist in New York, and this goes into her life story and how she ended up in New York and all of her relationships and how she wanted to be a star and she was a performer and, you know, her activism offering shelter to homeless trans youth. And she was at Stonewall riots, obviously. What I really loved in this book was that, of course, I knew a lot about Marsha beforehand, but this gave such a fuller picture of Marsha, and I learned a lot of things that I didn't even know about. Marsha was such a light, and I feel like this biography really does justice to Marsha and her memory, and it has really beautiful pictures of her as well. She really was a star, and she should still be here with us. And this was such beautifully written memoir and homage to Marsha P. Johnson. So now that we already covered best memoir, let's continue with the non-fiction category. So the best non-fiction book is Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal by Mohammed El-Qud. This is a collection of essays that had been published before and some new writing regarding the topic of how Palestinians have to perform this role of a perfect victim in order for them to be grieved in Western media and Western societies. But even then, there's also all these prerequisites that Palestinians have to fulfill before they are allowed the same human grieving as other people. And the point of this book is that even if you do not agree with a Palestinian politically, even if a Palestinian does something that you deem unsavory, they still do not deserve to be genocided. They do not deserve to live under apartheid rule. They do not deserve to have their land stolen. They do not deserve to have their families targeted by a military which is powered and backed by the biggest military powers in the world. I feel like Mohammed El-Qud argued his points really strongly in this book, and I feel like the background of him having to talk about all of these things for years and years and years really was apparent in this book. I highly recommend this to anyone who has any kind of questions about whether they want to support Palestine. Obviously, at this point of the genocide, if you do not support Palestinian rights to freedom, I don't know what to tell you. But highly recommend reading this book. It's obviously heavy and discusses really awful topics, but it didn't feel like it dragged or that it was too hard to read. Congratulations. Moving on to best classic, and I want to emphasize that this is for classic books that I read for the first time this year. I've reread Jane Austen so many times. This year I reread 2 of her books, so I'm not going to include those. I'm just going to include the ones that were new to me. And I read many great classics this year as well, but one that left me the most impacted was Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. This is kind of loosely based on James Baldwin's own childhood growing up in a religious community in Harlem. But it's more than just that. In this book, he tells the story of Johnny Grimes, who wants to become a preacher in his community. But his father or stepfather figure is also a preacher, but Johnny hates him. Johnny vows that for him things will be different, and this was just such an incredible look into this community in Harlem. It has an unlinear narrative. There are lots of flashbacks to, Johnny's mother's life and like time before Johnny, as well as moments from Johnny's childhood. It took me a while to get used to that non-linear narrative, but ultimately it made sense and it really added to the story. And the additions from the backstory really added to the current time in this book, which was in the 1930s. This was incredible. James Baldwin is one of my favorite authors. It was such an incredible experience reading this. Very heavy too. Very heavy as well. But I cannot recommend James Baldwin's books enough. Like, more people should read James Baldwin. And the next category is already best fiction. As I mentioned before, I've read so many excellent books this year, so choosing a favorite fiction was really, really difficult. I read Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad. which was incredible. Small Boat by Vincent Delacroix. That was amazing, deeply impactful. I read so many incredible books this year, but the one that impacted me the most and kind of inspired me the most was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This tells the fictionalized version of the story of Agnes Shakespeare, who was William Shakespeare's wife. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, and ultimately when their son Hamnet Shakespeare dies, which happened in real life, it details how Agnes goes through that grief, as well as William, but it mostly focuses on Agnes. And I wanted to read this book because the movie adaptation is coming. It's coming to Finland in January, which is ridiculous to me because it's been out in the US and elsewhere for a really long time. I watched the trailer and I was immensely impressed by it. So I was like, okay, I need to read the book before I see the movie. And I'm so glad I did. Broke my heart. Destroyed. And the way Maggie O'Farrell depicts the sorrow and the grief that Agnes has is so deeply moving, and it helped me with my own writing. When I was writing about grief, I realized that I need to discuss it even more deeply than just the grief itself, but all the different ways that it impacts you. Obviously, Hamnet and his passing away inspired the play Hamlet, and I've read that one before, so like those two connections were really interesting as well. I feel like the author really beautifully detailed grief and how to try to move on from it, but also not being able to move on from it. Like, it was just so incredibly beautiful and impactful, and this was amazing. So congratulations, best fiction of the year. As you may know or you may not know, I am from Finland. So I've started to award the best Finnish book of the year. And I do want to say that this book could have been one of the best books, just period, because it was so incredible. Isäni appelsiinin kukkien maasta by Irene Zidane. This tells the story of Amira Mansour, who is a reporter. And this book starts from October 2023, but it also contains unlinear narrative and shares flashbacks to Amira's own life. Amira's mother is Finnish and her father is Palestinian. Amira grows up in Finland. And it discusses all those different experiences that a person in the diaspora of her family experiences. It discusses how hard it is to be a reporter trying to report on genocide, especially when it's your own people that are being genocided. It discusses the lack of communication between Amira and her father because they have grown up in such different cultural surroundings. It even discusses like what even is culture, and it's written in a very airy way that even though it discusses such big themes, it never feels too overwhelming. And it's very human, it's very deeply impactful, it's really beautiful, and I really loved it so much. And this book kind of made me realize just how important literature in Finnish is and how important it is to support Finnish authors, because without Finnish literature, this book that's based on the Finnish-Palestinian experience would not exist. It is absolutely incredible, and if you are a Finnish person, lue tämä! Teidän on pakko lukea, oh my god, lukekaa muutenkin kirjoja. Congratulations. Okay, it is time. The best book of the year of 2025 that I read. And if you've been watching me regularly, you might guess which book it is. Middlemarch by George Eliot. I'm so annoyed that I didn't read this for so many years. But in a way, I think reading this at 28 also helped because I feel like I wasn't mature enough to read this beforehand. I read this in the beginning of the year, and that doesn't mean that other books didn't live up to Middlemarch or that other books weren't great. There was just something so deeply incredible about Middlemarch. So the book takes place in the fictional town of Middlemarch in England, and the two main characters are Dorothy and Brooke, who in the beginning of the book is an orphan, 19, and looking to marry so that she can have a better life and maybe educate herself. The other main character is Dr. Lydgate, who comes into Middlemarch to be the town doctor. But there are so many characters who add to these two stories. Ultimately, it's just this commentary on the English society in a microcosm in the town of Middlemarch. It discusses women's place in society and how different women experience society. For some, marriage is the only goal because that was the way for many women to secure their future. For some, they wanted to work. For some, they wanted to educate themselves. And in Dorothy's case, it shows that marriage is not everything that she was wishing that it would be. There are also other characters, for example, Fred, who is very restless, very carefree, gambles his money away, and he's trying to be better, trying to do better, but he just fucks up so many times. But ultimately, he tries and he tries. There's Mary, whom Fred loves, and Mary is just the sweetest person there. And I was expecting this to be very difficult to read because it's older English, but no, it was so accessible, much more than I expected. And yes, it's 900 pages, but it's divided into shorter books, so you can read it like one book at a time within a week or something, so it's not as daunting. And the language at some times was quite modern. My favorite line from the book probably is Fred saying, "Then I am to blow my brains out." It's perfect. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I can't believe this incredible book was just on my shelf all these years. And I wish I could read it for the first time again. Obviously, the added bonus was that I read this with my friend Aure, and weekly we discussed the events of each book. That added a lot to the reading experience. We actually filmed a video about it before, if you are interested in that. Congratulations, the best book of the year, Middlemarch, George Eliot. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your favorite books of the year in the comments below. I also want to thank you so much for watching my videos this year. I feel like I had a really good year in making videos. A lot of the video ideas that I had were welcomed with open arms and people enjoyed them, which means just so much to me. I'm gonna take a couple of weeks off to celebrate Christmas and New Year's and my birthday, but I'll be back in 2026 with new videos. Alright, see you in the next year. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in the next one. Bye!